In the heart of Chicago's Gold Coast, where the skyline glittered like a crown of glass and steel, there existed a sanctuary for the city's elite Lumiere, a restaurant so exclusive it was whispered about in hushed tones, as if speaking its name too loudly might shatter its mystique. Tucked away on a quiet stretch of Michigan Avenue, its unassuming entrance, a single frosted glass door etched with a delicate silver L, belied the opulence within. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of saffron and aged Bordeaux, the lighting a soft amber glow that flattered the faces of the ultra-wealthy who dined there. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen constellations, their prisms catching the light and scattering it across tables draped in Italian linens. The clink of baccarat glassware and the murmur of discreet conversations created a symphony of privilege, a world where every gesture was calculated, every glance loaded with intent. This was no mere restaurant. It was a stage, a court, for the 0.3 to 1%, where power was displayed not just in wealth, but in the ability to command fear. And no one wielded that fear with more precision than Evelyn Caldwell, the wife of Victor Caldwell, a financial titan whose hedge fund had reshaped Chicago's economic landscape. Evelyn was the uncrowned queen of Lumiere, a figure so formidable that her arrival sent ripples of dread through the staff, from the executive chef to the lowliest busboy. Her presence was a ritual, a meticulously choreographed performance that began an hour before she stepped through the door, when her assistant's call would arrive crisp and non-negotiable, demanding her usual table, table 1, a secluded alcove with a view of the entire dining room bathed in a custom-adjusted light that softened her features to an ethereal perfection. The staff would spring into action. The sommelier would select a bottle of Chateau Petrus, chilled to exactly 14 degrees Celsius. The florist would ensure a single white orchid, its petals pristine, sat in a lalique vase. And the manager, Mr. Laurent, a wiry man with a perpetually furrowed brow, would pace the floor, muttering to himself as he checked every detail. "Mrs. Caldwell is 10 minutes out." He'd whisper, his voice trembling, as if announcing an approaching storm. The staff would straighten their spines, adjust their ties, and brace for the scrutiny of a woman whose displeasure could end careers with a single icy word. Evelyn never merely arrived, she manifested. At precisely 7:45 p.m., her sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom would glide to a stop outside its engine, purring like a contented predator. She would emerge tall and willowy, her figure accentuated by tailored couture, often a stark, monochromatic ensemble that cost more than a year's rent in the city. Her face, a masterpiece of subtle cosmetic artistry, was a mask of serene elegance, but her eyes, a pale green that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone, missed nothing. They scanned the room like a hawk's cataloging imperfections, a waiter's slightly crooked tie, a glass with a faint smudge, a patron's laugh that was a touch too loud. Her cruelty was not loud or theatrical. It was surgical, delivered in a tone so soft it forced you to lean in to hear your own destruction. Once she had reduced a veteran sommelier to a stammering wreck by claiming his choice of wine had an aftertaste of mediocrity. Another time she'd had a hostess dismissed for wearing earrings she deemed ostentatiously cheap. Victor, her husband, a man whose financial machinations had toppled competitors and amassed billions, would sit beside her, his broad frame filling out a bespoke suit, a faint smirk playing on his lips. He was the brute force, the hammer. She was the scalpel, slicing through egos with a precision that left no visible scars. Together, they were untouchable, a duo that held Lumiere and much of Chicago's elite in a vice grip of awe and terror. Into this gilded lion's den stepped Norah Ellison, a 24-year-old law student at the University of Chicago, whose life was a stark contrast to the world of Lumiere. Norah was not of this world. She was a scholarship kid From a working-class family, her hands more accustomed to gripping case law textbooks than polishing silver. Her small apartment in Pilsen was a chaotic collage of legal pads, half-finished coffee mugs, and case briefs, a far cry from the sterile opulence of Lumiere. She had taken the job as a waitress for one reason: survival. Law school was a crushing financial burden, and the tips at Lumiere were legendary enough to keep her loans at bay and maybe, just maybe, fund her dream of opening a pro bono legal clinic one day. Her first day was a blur of protocol, with Mr. Laurent spending less time on the menu than on the Caldwell commandments. "You do not speak unless spoken to," he'd instructed, his voice low and urgent, as if imparting state secrets. "You anticipate her needs. Her water glass must never dip below a third full, but never so full it risks a spill. You address her as Mrs. Caldwell, never Ms., never Evelyn. Is that clear?" Norah, used to the blunt honesty of law school seminars, found it absurd. "She's just a customer, right?" she'd asked, her dark eyes narrowing. Mr. Laurent froze, staring at her as if she'd suggested serving ketchup with caviar. "Miss Ellison," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "she is not a customer. She is the customer. Her approval keeps our stars. Her disapproval ends us. Understand?" Norah nodded, but the weight of his words didn't fully register. How could one woman hold such sway over so many? She got her answer on her second week, a humid Thursday night, when the dining room buzzed with the usual tension. Norah was shadowing Claire, a seasoned waitress with a perpetually tight smile and eyes that darted nervously. The air shifted, a collective intake of breath among the staff, as Mr. Laurent hissed, "Mrs. Caldwell is here." Evelyn swept in, her charcoal gray dress clinging to her like a second skin, a diamond brooch glittering at her collarbone. Victor trailed behind, his phone already in hand, his expression one of bored indifference. The staff moved like clockwork. The sommelier presented the Petrus with a bow, the busboy adjusted the orchid's position by a millimeter, and Claire approached the table, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. Evelyn ignored her for a full minute, continuing her conversation with Victor about a gala they were hosting. Claire stood silent, her gaze fixed on a spot just above Evelyn's shoulder. Finally, Evelyn turned, her eyes raking over Claire like a scanner. "You're trembling," she said, her voice a velvet blade. "It's unbecoming. It disrupts the ambiance." Norah, standing a few feet away, felt her stomach tighten. Claire's face remained neutral, but her hands betrayed a slight shake. "My apologies, Mrs. Caldwell," she said, her voice steady despite the insult. "What may I bring you tonight?" Evelyn's order was a labyrinth of demands, a salad of microgreens, each leaf no larger than a dime, dressed with a Ligurian olive oil that had to be from a specific estate. A Dover sole-filleted tableside with the Beurre Blanc sauce served at exactly 38 degrees Celsius. Victor grunted, the usual, which meant a dry-aged ribeye, medium rare, no further fuss. As Claire retreated, Norah caught the flicker of exhaustion in her eyes. This wasn't service, it was survival. Later in the kitchen's frenetic sanctuary, Norah found Claire leaning against a counter, her hands still shaking. "Is she always like that?" Norah asked, her voice low. Claire let out a bitter laugh. "That was her being kind, kid. You haven't seen her when she's out for blood. Just stay invisible. That's the only way to survive her." Norah nodded, but something stirred within her, a spark of defiance honed by years of fighting for every opportunity she'd ever had. She wasn't built for invisibility. In law school, she thrived on dismantling arguments, on finding the crack in a case's foundation. As she polished wine glasses, her reflection staring back from the crystal, she felt the weight of Lumiere's world pressing down on her. At its center was Evelyn Caldwell, a gravitational force of cruelty and control. Norah didn't yet know how, but she sensed she was on a collision course with that force. 3 weeks into her tenure, Norah's invisibility ended abruptly. It was a sweltering Friday evening, the kind where Chicago's humidity clung to the skin like a second layer. Claire had called in sick, a rare occurrence that sent Mr. Laurent into a panic. In a moment of desperation, he assigned Norah to Section 1, the Caldwell section. "Just follow the protocol," he whispered, his hands visibly damp. "Be a ghost. Bring the bread, the water, and nothing else unless she asks. Understand?" Norah's heart pounded, but she nodded, smoothing her black uniform apron. She reminded herself of the case briefs waiting at home, the loans she was chipping away at with every shift. These were just people, she told herself. Just customers. The Caldwells arrived at 8 Urup sharp Evelyn in a midnight blue gown that shimmered like liquid obsidian. Victor, in a charcoal suit, his eyes glued to his phone. Norah approached 2 leather-bound menus in hand, her steps measured. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. She placed the menus down, careful not to let her fingers brush the table. Evelyn's gaze snapped to her, sharp and predatory, like a cat spotting a new toy. "I don't know you," she said, her tone flat but laced with menace. "I'm Norah, Mrs. Caldwell," she replied, meeting her eyes for a fraction of a second. "I started 3 weeks ago." Evelyn tilted her head, her lips curling into a faint, unreadable smile. "Claire is unavailable?" "Yes, Mrs. Caldwell, she's under the weather." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. How inconvenient. This establishment's standards are slipping. First, the linens last week, slightly creased, utterly unacceptable. And now, this. She picked up the menu but kept her gaze on Norah. "Let's see if you can manage. I'll have a Negroni, but it must be made with Carpano Antica, not Punt Emis, and the gin must be Hendrix Orbium, stirred for exactly 20 seconds, with a blood orange peel, expressed, not dropped. The glass must be chilled to 5 degrees Celsius. Can you manage that, or will you need to scribble it like a schoolgirl?" It was a trap. A classic Evelyn Caldwell power play, designed to fluster and expose weakness. Norah's mind, trained to memorize legal precedents, clicked into gear. Carpano Antica Hendrix. Orbium stirred 20 seconds, blood orange peel, expressed glass at 5 degrees. She repeated, her voice calm, her eyes steady. "And for you, Mr. Caldwell?" Victor didn't look up. "McAllen." 25. "Neat." Norah nodded. "Right away." At the bar, the bartender, a grizzled man named Tony, raised an eyebrow. "The Orbium Negroni. She's testing you, kid. Want me to check the glass temp?" "Please," Norah said, her tone serious. Tony chuckled, but there was respect in his eyes as he pulled out a thermometer. When Norah returned with the drinks, she placed them with precision, the Negroni's glass frosted to perfection, the McAllen glowing like liquid amber. Evelyn didn't touch her drink. Instead, she leaned back, her eyes flicking to the ceiling. "The lighting," she said, her voice a soft hiss. "It's off tonight. It's casting a shadow that's unflattering." Norah glanced up. The lighting was computer-controlled, identical across the room, a warm 2700 Kelvin. Another test, another impossible complaint. Most would have stammered, called for Mr. Laurent, but Norah saw it for what it was, a challenge not unlike a cross-examination. She thought fast, her law school brain kicking in. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Caldwell," she said, her voice smooth. "It does seem a touch stark." Without hesitating, she reached for the small, unlit votive candle on the table, struck a match, and lit it. The flame flickered, casting a warm glow. Then, with a subtle movement, She nudged the orchid vase a half-inch to the right, letting its petals catch the candlelight and diffuse a soft, flattering glow across Evelyn's face. It was a tiny adjustment, but it softened the shadows, warming Evelyn's features. "Is that better, Mrs. Caldwell?" she asked, stepping back. Evelyn froze, her eyes narrowing. She hadn't expected a solution, certainly not one so elegant and swift. Her lips parted, then closed, a flicker of irritation crossing her face before she masked it with a cold smile. "Adequate," she said, dismissing Norah with a wave. Victor, who had glanced up from his phone, raised an eyebrow, a rare spark of interest in his expression. "She's quick," he muttered to Evelyn, who didn't respond. Her eyes followed Norah as she retreated, a predator sizing up a new kind of prey. As Norah moved back to the service station, her heart still racing, she felt the weight of that moment. She hadn't just survived Evelyn Caldwell, she'd countered her, however slightly. But she knew this was only the beginning. Evelyn's interest, once piqued, was a dangerous thing, a spotlight that burned rather than illuminated. In the kitchen, Tony gave her a nod. "You handled that like a pro, kid. But watch your back. She doesn't like being outplayed." Norah nodded, her mind already racing. She didn't know it yet, but that small victory had set her on a path that would unravel not just Evelyn's carefully constructed world, but the dark secrets at its foundation. Secrets tied to Norah's own past, to a family home lost in a deal orchestrated by Victor Caldwell's ruthless ambition. The stage was set, and Norah Ellison, the quiet law student with a fire in her veins, was about to discover just how fragile the empires of the powerful could be. Norah Ellison's life outside Lumiere was a study in contrasts to the restaurant's gilded excess. Her cramped studio apartment in Pilsen, a vibrant but gritty Chicago neighborhood, was a patchwork of law textbooks, scattered post-it notes, and half-finished case briefs scrawled in her meticulous handwriting. The walls were bare, except for a single framed photograph of her parents standing outside their old family home in Englewood, a modest two-story house with a sagging porch and a garden her mother had tended with fierce pride. That house was gone now, swallowed by a redevelopment project spearheaded by Victor Caldwell's hedge fund 16 years ago when Norah was just 8. The memory of that loss lingered like a bruise. Her father's defeated slump as he packed up their belongings, her mother's quiet tears as they moved into a cramped rental. The stress, Norah always believed, had contributed to her father's stroke 2 years later, a loss that fueled her drive through law school. She wasn't just studying to become a lawyer, she was arming herself to fight the kind of power that had crushed her family. Lumiere was a means to an end, a way to pay for tuition and keep the lights on. But after her first encounter with Evelyn Caldwell, it was becoming something more, a battlefield where Norah's resilience was tested daily. The Monday after her candlelit triumph over Evelyn's lighting complaint, Norah arrived at Lumiere with a knot of apprehension in her chest. The victory had been small, but significant. A crack in Evelyn's armor, and Norah knew it wouldn't go unanswered. The dining room was quieter than usual, the lunchtime crowd sparse, but the air still carried the weight of expectation. "Mr. Laurent?" The manager pulled her aside before her shift, his eyes darting nervously. "Mrs. Caldwell requested you specifically for her table today," he said, his voice low, as if Evelyn might hear him from miles away. "This is an honor, Norah. Don't squander it." Norah nodded, but her stomach tightened. Honor wasn't the word for it. This was scrutiny, a predator circling closer. As she tied her apron, she caught Claire's eye across the kitchen. The older waitress, back from her sick day, gave her a look that was half pity, half warning. "Be careful," Claire mouthed before turning back to her prep work. Norah took a deep breath, steeling herself. She wasn't just a waitress here. She was a law student trained to spot patterns to read between the lines. And Evelyn Caldwell was a puzzle she was determined to solve. At 12:30 p.m., Evelyn arrived alone this time, her presence no less commanding without Victor's brooding bulk beside her. She wore a tailored ivory blazer and skirt, her platinum blonde hair swept into an impeccable chignon, a single emerald ring glinting on her finger. She settled into table 1, her movements precise, almost mechanical, as if she were a machine programmed for perfection. Norah approached menu in hand, her heart a steady drumbeat. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Caldwell," she said, placing the menu down with care. Evelyn didn't look at it. Her pale green eyes locked onto Norah, sharp and unyielding. "You're still here," she said, her voice a soft blade. "I'd have thought a girl like you would have crumbled by now." Norah held her gaze, her expression neutral. "I'm here to serve Mrs. Caldwell. What may I start you with?" Evelyn's lips curled into a faint predatory smile. "Let's test your memory again. I want a salad of baby arugula sourced from a farm in Sonoma, dressed with a yuzu vinaigrette, no more than a teaspoon, and a single quail egg soft-boiled for exactly 90 seconds. The plate must be warmed, but not hot 35 degrees Celsius. And a glass of Sancerre Domaine Vacheron 2021 chilled to 11 degrees. Can you manage that without scribbling? It was another trap more intricate than the Negroni designed to expose any weakness. Norah's mind clicked into gear, cataloging the details. Sonoma arugula yuzu vinaigrette, 1 teaspoon 90-second quail egg plate, at 35 degrees, Vacheron Sancerre 2021 at 11 degrees, she repeated, her voice calm. Evelyn's smile tightened, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. "We'll see," she said, dismissing Norah with a flick of her hand. In the kitchen, Norah relayed the order to Chef Marcel, a wiry Frenchman whose temper was as legendary as his sauces. "Sonoma arugula," he barked, slamming a pan onto the stove. "She thinks I keep a farm in my pocket and a 90-second egg. Mon Dieu, she's trying to kill us." Norah didn't flinch. "She's trying to kill me," she said, her tone dry. Marcel paused, then gave her a grudging nod. "You're tougher than you look, petite. Let's not give her the satisfaction." The kitchen moved like a well-oiled machine, producing the salad with a precision that bordered on obsessive. Tony, the bartender, checked the Sancerre's temperature with a laser thermometer, muttering, "She's got you in her crosshairs, kid." When Norah returned with the order, Evelyn inspected the plate as if it were evidence in a trial, her fork hovering over the greens. She took a single bite, chewed slowly, then set the fork down. "The vinaigrette," she said, her voice a low hiss, "is too acidic." "Did you even taste it?" Norah knew the vinaigrette was perfect. Marcel had tasted it himself, but she didn't argue. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Caldwell. Shall I have the chef prepare a new one?" Evelyn's eyes narrowed, searching for a crack in Norah's composure. Finding none, she waved her away. "No, it's barely tolerable. Leave it." As Norah retreated, she felt Evelyn's gaze burning into her back. But something else caught her attention, a snippet of a phone conversation as she passed the vestibule where Evelyn had stepped to take a call. Her voice, usually so controlled, had a tremor Norah hadn't heard before. "Victor, you can't pull out now," she said, her tone almost pleading. "After everything I've done, everything I've given up." The words trailed off as Evelyn noticed Norah nearby and abruptly ended the call, her face snapping back to its usual icy mask. Norah filed the moment away, her law student instincts kicking in. There was a crack in Evelyn's facade, a hint of vulnerability beneath the polished exterior. Who was she pleading with? And what had she given up That evening, back in her apartment, Norah couldn't shake the question. She opened her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. On a whim, she typed Victor Caldwell Chicago into a search engine. The results were a flood of business profiles, Forbes articles, and society pages painting him as a ruthless financier who'd built his empire on high-risk investments and aggressive acquisitions. But Evelyn was a shadow in those stories, mentioned only as Mrs. Caldwell, a fixture of Chicago's social scene. Norah frowned. For someone so dominant, Evelyn's past was curiously absent. The next week was a gauntlet of tests. Evelyn dined at Lumiere 4 times each visit, a new challenge designed to break Norah. On Tuesday, she demanded a dish not on the menu, a truffle risotto with Alba white truffles shaved tableside, the shavings to be exactly 3 millimeters thick. Norah, anticipating the trap, had checked the kitchen's inventory and confirmed with Marcel that they had the truffles. She executed the order flawlessly, even as Evelyn watched her every move, her eyes glinting with frustration. On Thursday, Evelyn escalated. As Norah cleared a plate, Evelyn let a pearl ring slip from her finger, letting it clatter to the floor. "Oh my," she said, her voice loud enough to draw eyes from nearby tables. "My ring. It's a family heirloom worth more than you'll ever earn. Find it, Norah." The accusation hung in the air, a deliberate attempt to humiliate. Norah knelt, her heart pounding, and spotted the ring under the table glinting against the carpet. She retrieved it, standing to face Evelyn's triumphant smirk. "Here it is, Mrs. Caldwell," she said, her voice steady. "It must have slipped. I'm glad it's safe." Evelyn's smile faltered, her plan thwarted by Norah's calm. "Careless of me," she said, her tone venomous. "You're quite resourceful, aren't you?" That night, Norah's curiosity became an obsession. She stayed up past midnight, digging deeper into Victor Caldwell's empire. She found an old article from the Chicago Tribune buried in an archive about a controversial redevelopment project in Englewood 16 years ago. Caldwell's hedge fund had acquired a swath of land, displacing dozens of families and small businesses. The article mentioned protests, families holding signs outside their homes, and a name that stopped Norah cold: Ellison. Her family's home, her father's corner store, had been part of that deal. The memory flooded back her father's anger, the letters from lawyers offering a fraction of the property's value, the eventual eviction. Norah's hands shook as she scrolled further, finding a reference to a financial maneuver that had secured the project's funding, a complex bond issuance backed by a shell company. The article hinted at irregularities, a whistleblower who'd claimed the deal involved insider trading, but the case had collapsed when the whistleblower vanished. Norah's pulse quickened. Could Evelyn have been involved? She searched for Evelyn Caldwell, maiden name, finding a society page from 20 years ago that listed her as Evelyn Harper, a young analyst at a financial firm tied to Victor's early ventures. The next day, Norah visited the university library using her student access to dig into financial records. She found a regulatory filing from the Securities and Exchange Commission dated 2009 mentioning Evelyn Harper as a junior analyst at Pinnacle Capital, a firm that had handled Victor's bond issuance. A footnote referenced a dismissed SEC investigation into Pinnacle with a key witness. Evelyn Harper, recanting her testimony about irregular trades. The case had evaporated, and shortly after, Evelyn married Victor. Norah's breath caught. Evelyn hadn't just married into power. She'd bought her way in with a lie burying evidence that could have derailed Victor's empire. This was the crack Norah had been searching for, the fragile foundation beneath Evelyn's icy throne. Back at Lumiere, Evelyn's attacks grew more personal. On Friday, she noticed a small silver locket. Norah wore a gift from her mother, etched with a tiny star. "That locket," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's quaint, but it cheapens the uniform. This isn't a flea market. Remove it." Norah's hand went to the locket, her composure wavering. It was her mother's, a reminder of the woman who'd taught her to fight for what was right. "It's sentimental, Mrs. Caldwell," she said, her voice soft but firm. Evelyn's eyes gleamed. "Sentiment is for private moments, not my dining room. Take it off, or I'll have Mr. Laurent do it for you." Norah's fingers hesitated, then unclasped the locket, slipping it into her pocket. "As you wish," she said, meeting Evelyn's gaze. The victory should have satisfied Evelyn, but Norah's quiet dignity only seemed to enrage her further. She leaned in, her voice a whisper. "You think you're clever, don't you? You won't last here. I'll make sure of it." In the staff room, Claire found Norah polishing silver, her hands moving with mechanical precision. "She's not just testing you anymore," Claire said, her voice low. "She's hunting you. Why do you keep pushing back?" Norah looked up, her eyes fierce. "Because I'm not invisible, Claire. And neither is she. She's hiding something, and I'm going to find out what." Claire shook her head. "You're playing a dangerous game, Norah. She's not just a customer. She's a force of nature." But Norah wasn't listening. She was already planning her next move, her law student mind piecing together the puzzle. Evelyn's cruelty wasn't strength. It was a desperate defense of a life built on a lie. And Norah, armed with the truth, was about to become her greatest threat. The Nightlight Gala was Lumiere's crown jewel, a charity event for the Chicago Children's Hospital that transformed the restaurant into a glittering stage for the city's elite. Held annually in late summer, it was the pinnacle of Chicago's social calendar, drawing billionaires, politicians, and celebrities under a canopy of twinkling fairy lights and cascading white orchids. The air buzzed with the clink of champagne flutes and the hum of power deals whispered over canapes. For Evelyn Caldwell, the gala was her coronation, her moment to shine. As the event's chairwoman, her silver gown and flawless smile, a beacon of untouchable authority. This year, however, the gala was more than a showcase. It was her battlefield meticulously chosen to orchestrate the public humiliation of Norah Ellison, the waitress who had dared to defy her. Norah, now 4 weeks into her tenure at Lumiere, had become an obsession for Evelyn. The young law student's quiet resilience, her refusal to crumble under impossible demands, had turned Evelyn's usual games into a personal vendetta. Norah's ability to counter her traps, the perfectly executed risotto, the retrieved ring, the candlelit lighting fix, had made her a threat, a crack in Evelyn's carefully curated image of omnipotence. The gala, with its press corps and powerful guests, was the perfect stage to crush her. Norah knew the assignment to Evelyn's head table was no honor. Mr. Laurent had delivered the news with a mix of pride and panic, his hands fidgeting as he spoke. "Mrs. Caldwell specifically requested you for Table 1, he said, his voice tight. "This is a chance to prove yourself, Norah, but the pressure is immense. One mistake, and—" He didn't finish, but his eyes said it all. One mistake could end her. In the staff room, Claire pulled Norah aside, her face pale. "This is a trap," she whispered, her voice urgent. "She's not rewarding you. She's setting you up. Whatever she's planning, it's big. Watch every step, Norah." Norah nodded, her heart a steady drumbeat. She'd spent the last week digging deeper into Evelyn's past, piecing together the fragments of the SEC investigation and the Englewood redevelopment. The whistleblower's recantation. Evelyn's marriage to Victor. The collapse of the case, it all pointed to a truth. Norah now held like a loaded weapon. Evelyn's entire life was built on a lie. A betrayal that had secured Victor's empire and her own throne. Norah wasn't just fighting for her job anymore. She was fighting for the memory of her family's home, for the justice her father never got. The gala was her chance to turn the tables. The night of the gala. Lumiere was a vision of opulence. The dining room, already a masterpiece of elegance, was transformed with thousands of fairy lights woven into chandeliers, their glow reflecting off polished silver and crystal. Tables were draped in midnight blue linens, each centerpiece a cascade of orchids and candles that flickered like stars. Norah wore the gala's special uniform, a sleek black dress with a silver sash, her hair pulled into a neat bun. She moved through the controlled chaos with a focused grace, her law student mind cataloging every detail, the placement of the press, the body language of the guests, the subtle signals between staff. Evelyn arrived at 7:00 p.m., radiant, in a silver gown that shimmered like liquid moonlight, a sapphire necklace, the famed Caldwell star, a 40-carat gem gifted by Victor, glinting at her throat. Victor followed his broad frame filling a tuxedo, his expression one of practiced charm as he shook hands with a senator and a tech mogul. The head table was a constellation of power, a hedge fund CEO, a city councilwoman, and Arthur Grayson, Victor's longtime rival whose real estate empire had clashed with Caldwell's for decades. Evelyn held court, her laughter sharp and crystalline, her eyes scanning the room for any imperfection. Norah served the table with precision, her movements silent and deliberate. She poured water, delivered amuse-bouches, and cleared plates, all while feeling Evelyn's gaze like a laser on her back. The first courses passed without incident, but Norah knew the calm was deceptive. Evelyn's tests had grown bolder, more personal, and this was her grand stage. As Norah cleared the main course, roasted quail with a black truffle juice, Evelyn let out a theatrical gasp, her hand flying to her throat. "My necklace!" she cried, her voice carrying across the hushed room. "The Caldwell star, it's gone." The chatter at the head table stopped, a ripple of shock spreading outward. Heads turned, eyes locked on Evelyn, whose neck was now bare, the sapphire absent. Victor stood, his face darkening. "What the hell, Evelyn? You were just wearing it." Evelyn's eyes widened, her distress a perfect performance. "I felt it a moment ago," she said, her voice trembling with calculated panic. Then slowly, deliberately, she turned to Norah, who stood frozen with a stack of plates. "You," she said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You were just here clearing my plate. You brushed against my chair." Norah's heart pounded, but she hadn't touched Evelyn's chair. She'd been meticulous, as always. "Mrs. Caldwell," she began, her voice steady, "I assure you—" "Don't lie to me," Evelyn snapped, her voice rising to draw every eye in the room. "You were the only one close enough. Mr. Laurent, I want her searched. Call security. The Caldwell star is worth $10 million. The accusation hung in the air, like smoke thick and suffocating. The gala fell silent, the press inching closer, cameras flashing. Mr. Laurent hurried over his face, ash in his eyes, pleading with Norah to make it stop. Victor glared at her, his fists clenched, while Arthur Grayson leaned back, a faint smirk on his lips. The guests whispered, their faces a mix of shock and morbid fascination. This was the scandal. They'd come for the drama that would dominate tomorrow's headlines. Norah stood in the center of the storm, the weight of every gaze pressing down on her. She knew this was Evelyn's endgame, to brand her a thief, to humiliate her in front of Chicago's elite, to ensure she'd never work in this city again. But Norah wasn't the naive girl Evelyn thought she was. She'd prepared for this, her law student mind anticipating every move. She set the plates down on a nearby stand, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. She straightened her eyes, locking not on Evelyn, but on Victor, the man whose empire had destroyed her family. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, her voice clear and resonant, cutting through the tension, "you're right that your necklace is gone, And you're right that I was close to your table. But I think you're mistaken about where it went." Evelyn's smile faltered, a flicker of unease in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Norah ignored her, turning her gaze to Victor. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her tone calm but unwavering, "do you remember a redevelopment project in Englewood 16 years ago? The one that turned a neighborhood of small businesses and family homes into the Caldwell Plaza?" Victor's face, already tense, twitched with something annoyance recognition. "This is absurd," he barked. "We're talking about a stolen necklace, not ancient history." But Norah pressed on, her voice steady, her law school training guiding her like a script. "That project displaced dozens of families, including mine. My father ran a corner store, Ellison's Market. It wasn't much, but it was our home, our community. Your shell companies offered us pennies, and when we fought back, your lawyers buried us. The stress killed my father 2 years later." A murmur rippled through the gala, the guests leaning in the press, scribbling furiously. Evelyn's face paled, her hands gripping the table. "This is irrelevant," she snapped. "Security, remove her." But no one moved. Norah held the room captive, her voice a quiet blade. "It's not irrelevant, Mrs. Caldwell," she said, turning to her, "because that project, your husband's first big win, was built on a lie, wasn't it? A lie you helped create." The air grew heavier, the silence absolute. Norah stepped closer to the table, her eyes locked on Evelyn's. "I did some research," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. 16 years ago, an SEC investigation looked into Pinnacle Capital, the firm that handled your husband's bond issuance for the Englewood project. There was a whistleblower, a young analyst named Evelyn Harper. She had evidence of insider trading, didn't she? Ledgers showing payments to city officials, trades that shouldn't have happened. She was ready to testify to bring the whole deal down, but then, right before the hearing, she recanted, said she was mistaken. The case collapsed, the permits went through, and a few months later, Evelyn Harper became Evelyn Caldwell, wife of the man she saved. Evelyn's face was a mask of horror, her lips trembling. Victor's expression had turned to stone, his eyes darting to his wife. The guests were riveted, the press cameras flashing like lightning. Norah didn't stop. "You didn't just marry into power, Mrs. Caldwell," she said, her voice soft with devastating pity. "You bought it with a lie. And you've spent every day since building a throne to hide that scared young woman who betrayed her own conscience." Evelyn's hand shot to her throat, an instinctive gesture, and Norah seized the moment. "As for your necklace," she said, her voice rising slightly, "I don't have it, but I think you might want to check with someone closer to your husband's circle." She pointed not at Victor, but at Arthur Grayson, whose smirk had vanished. "Mr. Grayson," she said, "you've been eyeing that necklace all night, planning to use it maybe a little leverage in your next deal with Victor. The Caldwell Star has a tracking chip, doesn't it? Standard for a piece that valuable? Shall we check your pocket?" Grayson's face flushed, his hand twitching toward his jacket. The room erupted in gasps, the press surging forward. Evelyn's eyes widened, her hand still at her throat, and in that moment, her fingers brushed a hidden clasp beneath her gown's neckline. A faint click, and the Caldwell Star, never missing, always there, slipped into view, dangling from its chain. The gasp from the guests was deafening. Evelyn's face drained of color, her performance unraveling in a single self-incriminating gesture. She'd staged the theft planned to frame Norah, but Norah had turned her trap against her, exposing not just the lie of the moment, but the lie of her entire life. The gala descended into chaos. Cameras flashed, guests whispered, and Mr. Laurent stammered, trying to regain control. Victor stared at Evelyn, his face a mask of cold fury, not at Norah, but at his wife, whose scandal now threatened his empire. Arthur Grayson stood, his expression a mix of anger and amusement, and slipped out, leaving Evelyn alone in the spotlight. She stumbled back, her silver gown now a garish costume, her eyes wide with the terror of exposure. Norah stepped back, her heart racing, but her face calm. She'd done it not with anger, but with truth, a weapon sharper than any of Evelyn's barbs. As she walked toward the staff room, the weight of the moment settled over her. She'd humiliated Evelyn Caldwell not just as a cruel socialite, but as a fraud whose past had finally caught up with her. But Norah knew this wasn't the end. Evelyn's fall was only the beginning, and the real battle with Victor with the truth was still to come. The aftermath of the Nightlight Gala was a storm that swept through Chicago's elite circles, leaving Lumiere's pristine dining room feeling like the wreckage of a battlefield. The image of Evelyn Caldwell, her hand betraying the hidden Caldwell star necklace, her face a canvas of shock and shame, was plastered across tabloids and social media by morning. Headlines screamed of scandal, socialites, staged theft implodes at charity gala, and Caldwell empire, rocked by Waitress's revelations. The press, ravenous for drama, dissected every detail: the accusation against Norah Ellison, the Englewood redevelopment, the whispers of a decades-old SEC investigation. For the staff at Lumiere, the night was a seismic shift. The restaurant, once a temple of untouchable wealth, felt exposed, its mystique tarnished. Mr. Laurent, the manager, was a wreck, pacing the back office, muttering about damage control, while fielding calls from furious board members. The staff whispered in the kitchen, their fear of Evelyn replaced by a wary awe of Norah, the quiet law student who had toppled a titan. But for Norah, standing in the staff room as the gala's chaos faded, the victory was bittersweet. Her hands trembled as she untied her apron, the adrenaline of her confrontation with Evelyn giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion. She had exposed the truth, but the cost was still unfolding, and the shadow of Victor Caldwell loomed larger than ever. The days following the gala were a blur of consequences. Evelyn vanished from Lumiere, her absence a deafening silence after years of her commanding presence. Rumors swirled she'd retreated to their Lake Forest mansion, shunned by the social circle she'd once ruled. The Chicago Tribune ran a follow-up story digging into the Englewood project and hinting at renewed interest in the old SEC case. Norah, back in her Pilsen apartment, felt the weight of her actions. She'd expected retaliation, and it came swiftly. 2 days after the gala, a man in a dark suit appeared outside her apartment building, his presence too deliberate to be coincidence. He didn't approach, but his stare as she left for class sent a chill down her spine. A day later, an anonymous email arrived, its tone cold and professional. "You've made powerful enemies, Miss Ellison. Consider your next steps carefully." Norah recognized the hand of Victor Caldwell, a man whose empire thrived on control and intimidation. She saved the email, her law student instincts kicking in. Evidence, she thought. She'd need it. At Lumiere, the atmosphere was tense. Mr. Laurent called Norah into his office, his face haggard. "You can't work here anymore," he said, avoiding her eyes. "Not because you did anything wrong, but the Caldwells are too powerful. Mrs. Caldwell's humiliated, but Mr. Caldwell, he's dangerous." "I'm sorry, Norah." She nodded, unsurprised. "I understand," she said, her voice steady. "But I'm not sorry." Laurent looked at her, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "You're either the bravest person I've met, or the most reckless. Be careful." As she left Lumiere for the last time, Claire caught her at the service entrance, pressing a folded note into her hand. "You did what none of us could," Claire whispered. "But watch your back. Victor doesn't forget. The note contained a phone number and a single word, allies. Norah tucked it into her pocket, her resolve hardening. She wasn't alone in this fight, not anymore. Back at her apartment, Norah poured her energy into her law school work, channeling the gala's fallout into a research project for her ethics seminar. She titled it The Cost of Complicity, Financial Misconduct, and Social Accountability, weaving in anonymized details of the Englewood case and the SEC investigation. Her professor, a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Patel, raised an eyebrow at the draft. "This is bold, Norah," she said. "You're walking a fine line. Are you ready for the consequences?" Norah met her gaze. "I've been ready since I was 8. Dr. Patel nodded, a rare smile breaking through. "Then make it airtight. You're not just writing a paper. You're building a case." Norah spent nights in the library cross-referencing financial records, old news articles, and public documents. She found a second whistleblower from the Pinnacle Capital case, a man named Robert Klein, who'd left Chicago after the investigation collapsed. His LinkedIn profile listed him as a consultant in Seattle. On a hunch, Norah sent him a carefully worded email mentioning the Englewood project and Pinnacle's bond issuance. To her surprise, he replied within hours, "I thought I'd buried that part of my life. Meet me. Zoom. Tomorrow." Klein's face weathered and cautious appeared on her laptop screen the next day. Evelyn Harper was the key. He said, his voice low. She had the ledgers, the proof of insider trades. When she recanted, I was hung out to dry. I left because I had no choice. You're stirring up a hornet's nest, kid. Norah leaned forward. I know, but I need your help. Will you testify if it comes to that? Klein hesitated, then nodded. Send me what you have. I'll see what I can do. Meanwhile, Victor Caldwell moved to contain the damage. A press release from Caldwell Capital announced a restructuring of their charitable foundation, with Evelyn stepping down as chairwoman. The subtext was clear: she was being cut loose. Norah saw it for what it was, Victor's pragmatic amputation of a liability. The society pages buzzed with speculation about a divorce, and a grainy photo surfaced of Evelyn alone at a coffee shop. Her face haggard, her designer sunglasses failing to hide the strain. Norah felt no pity. Evelyn's cruelty had been a choice, a mask to cover her own guilt. But Victor was the real architect, the man whose ambition had destroyed her family's home. Norah knew he wouldn't stop at intimidation. She contacted a friend from law school, a junior reporter at the Chicago Sun-Times named Mia Chen. Over coffee, Norah handed her a USB drive containing copies of the SEC filings, Klein's contact information, and a timeline of the Englewood project. This is bigger than me, Norah said, but it needs to be told. Mia's eyes widened as she scanned the files. Norah, this could bring down Caldwell Capital. Are you sure? Norah nodded. I'm sure. Just keep my name out of it for now. A week later, the Sun-Times published a front-page exposé, Caldwell Capital's dark past insider trading allegations resurface. The article cited new evidence and an unnamed source detailing Pinnacle Capital's role in the Englewood deal and Evelyn's recantation. It stopped short of naming Klein, but his affidavit sent anonymously to the SEC was enough to spark a formal inquiry. Victor's empire began to wobble, his stock plummeting as investors pulled out. Norah watched from her apartment, her laptop open to the news, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. She hadn't sought revenge, she'd sought justice, and the truth was doing its work. But she wasn't done. In a final act, she mailed a small package to Evelyn's Lake Forest address, care of the mansion's staff. Inside was a photocopy of the 2009 SEC filing with Evelyn's name highlighted and a handwritten note, "The truth doesn't stay buried. N.E." It was a reminder not of cruelty, but of accountability, a quiet jab to ensure Evelyn would never forget the cost of her choices. Norah's life began to shift. She threw herself into her studies, her seminar paper earning high praise and a recommendation for a summer clerkship at a public interest law firm. She moved to a new apartment, a small but sunny space closer to campus, funded by a scholarship she'd applied for after leaving Lumiere. The weight of her family's loss, carried since childhood, felt lighter, not gone, but bearable. She framed a new photo for her wall, one of her father outside Ellison's market, smiling with a customer. It wasn't the house, but it was a piece of him, a reminder of why she'd fought. At her clerkship, she began working on cases for displaced families, channeling her pain into purpose. One evening, walking home through Pilsen's mural-lined streets, she stopped at a community art gallery. On impulse, she submitted a proposal for an exhibit, a series of sketches inspired by her father's store-vivid charcoal drawings of corner shops, families, and the ghosts of lost neighborhoods. The gallery accepted, and her first show, titled Roots Uprooted, sold out its opening night. The centerpiece was a sketch of a woman in a silver gown, her face half hidden by shadow, a ledger clutched in her hands. In the background, faintly, was the outline of a small store, its sign reading, Ellison's Market. It was Norah's story, her truth rendered in lines and shades. Evelyn Caldwell's fall was complete. The divorce was finalized quietly, a settlement that left her with a fraction of Victor's wealth and none of his protection. She retreated from Chicago, her name a cautionary tale among the elite. Victor's empire staggered under the SEC's scrutiny, his IPO delayed indefinitely. Arthur Grayson, his rival, capitalized on the chaos, snapping up Caldwell Capital's weaker assets. Norah never returned to Lumiere, but she heard from Claire that the staff had hung a small anonymous sketch in the kitchen, a caricature of Evelyn, her necklace dangling her face, a mask of panic. It was their quiet rebellion, a nod to the waitress who'd changed everything. Norah didn't need their praise. She had her integrity, her father's memory, and a future she was building on her own terms. The truth she'd learned was a weapon sharper than any lie, and she wielded it with a quiet, unshakable strength. As she walked through Chicago's streets, the city's skyline no longer felt like a monument to men like Victor. It was hers now, a canvas for justice, a place where a law student with nothing but courage could make the powerful tremble.